Okay, I'm going to call this meeting of the Strategic Planning Committee in session for Tuesday, September 26, 2023. I am Martin Gator. I am the vice chair sitting in for Alma. She's out. She might be in video, but I'm going to take a roll call to see who's here today. Mike? Here. Vidal? Yes. Rihanna? Greg Evans? Philip? Beth?
Here.
Elaine? Let's see, Claire? Hoover? Pete? Here. And Gino? Here. Okay, we do have a quorum. Couple of announcements. First of all, just some preliminary remarks. Marianne Nolte has stepped down from the committee, just so we can, I don't want to say condolences or anything like that, but she's moved on to other things. And a change to the agenda tonight, the items for information, number 6A is actually 15 minutes versus 5. Okay. Are there any other announcements for the agenda or additions?
A couple of things. As I understand it, Councilor Evans will be calling in.
Oh, okay. Okay. Oh, actually, I think I see him right. Nope, that's me. I'm looking at myself there. Okay.
Right.
Okay.
And with respect to Marianne Nolte, we are trying to put something together for her service.
Oh, great. Okay.
And also share that with you all. She's obviously, then obviously be looking for.
Fantastic. Okay. Thank you. Anybody else with any announcements or additions to the agenda? Okay. Do we have any audience participation today?
No.
This is going to be a really quick meeting for me. All right, so I guess we're going to go right to item number 6 on the agenda. We're going to do a pilots project and LTD materials included. This is going to be Tom. He's going to be leading this. So why don't you go ahead, Tom?
Thank you. And I have with me tonight John Allen, who is actually the expert at this table on pilots and the piloting that we've done. But I wanted to start out just kicking this off, and you might recall, and we included it in the materials, the pilot implementation guide, and basically the board took action to adopt a mobility management strategy back in June. And that strategy really outlined how we wanted to approach the development of mobility management as a tool for accessibility through LTD. And so tonight, what we wanted to try and do, we've been conducting a couple of pilots already, talk about those, and then basically frame for you how we plan on moving forward with using pilots as a tool to help us explore. And I think this is an important part of this. Piloting is not just seeing the shiny object out there and say, hey, let's try this. It's really looking at perhaps a shiny object, but looking at how it fits within what we need, what our community needs us to be. So it's not everything that you see out there necessarily fits, and whatever it is, we need to make sure that it fits the needs that we're trying to serve. So just kind of that rational approach. And so I'm actually going to have John step through some of what we want to talk about tonight in terms of what we're doing, how we're doing that, kind of how we're looking forward to activating this program.
Great. So I'm happy to do that. We're going to go through fairly quickly, and I'm going to give some examples, but our time's going to be pretty short. So let me start by just giving you the tale of two different pilot programs. On the surface, they sound very similar. Tom did a great introduction, noting that the bus is one of our best tools, but it shouldn't be one of our only tools. We found that the world's changing and we need to be able to better meet our community needs. Pilot projects are a way for us to be able to try different things to be able to do that. Find ways to be able to get people where they need to go when the bus isn't going to be the best option. One way we tried doing that is through mobility on demand, which on the surface, it's for folks to be able to use their smartphone to book a trip where we pick someone up right where they're at and take them exactly where they need to go. Almost the exact opposite of what our bus does, where you need to be at the right place at the right time. Sometimes that isn't going to work for folks. So we tried that in two different areas, one within the city of Cottage Grove and the other in downtown Eugene. So we have the Cottage Grove Connector and MGO. These were both pilot projects initiated through Lane Transit. When you get beneath the superficial layer, you start to see why these two programs were very different. In the city of Cottage Grove, we heard very clearly from some members of the public, there were folks who said, I don't have a smartphone, or I don't know how to use a smartphone. What about me? We also were solving different problems. In City of Cottage Grove, we were trying to get vehicles in places that a bus didn't easily fit. There are alleys and narrow streets and neighborhoods where we just simply couldn't get a bus. And it's hard for us to get everywhere frequently in the Cottage Grove area. It's a ways away from the core metropolitan Eugene Springfield area, and it's a big commitment for us to send a large bus over there, particularly when it's going back and forth. In downtown Eugene, we were solving for a different problem. Downtown Eugene is where we've got more buses than just about anywhere. We were trying to, in addition to solving a parking problem, try and find a new mode of transport. So we found a different way of doing that. Whereas the Cottage Grove Connector used a cutaway similar to what we'd use on our paratransit service, for the MGO, we tried something completely different. We found these little Polaris GEM vehicles, and we first discovered that by going down to Anaheim and seeing people successfully using those to do a different mode of transport, and thought we might try to do the same here and see if we can replicate that success. We also evaluated it using similar criteria, but found different results. So we're looking at how much it costs, what's our ridership, and who we're serving. So what's the proportion of service that wasn't served by fixed route? How many older adults and people with disabilities are we serving? What was their experience of the service? So we're looking at what's the problem we solve? What benefit were we able to bring? How much did it cost us? What's the overall value that a program can bring to the table? After looking at all those different criteria and being able to thoroughly go through the data, the Cottage Grove Connector, still here and still in place within the city of Cottage Grove, MGO not as much. Not necessarily due to anybody's fault or that there was a problem. Sometimes things happen that you can't even predict. Particularly with the MGO, we're using these small golf cart sized vehicles to transport people in busy downtown, and then the pandemic starts. And suddenly that's not the best vehicle choice at that period in time in a way that we never could have predicted. And we needed to be able to adapt and be flexible. That's one thing that the fixed route bus is not good at. If we need to make large system-wide changes, it's slow for us to be able to roll that out and implement on our fixed route system. But exactly what a pilot project and what some of these different modes of transportation are great at. If we need to be able to adapt, make changes, flex our service hours, realize that we need more than one vehicle during peak hours. Maybe we can shorten or lengthen other service hours. We're able to do that. So that's just an example where on the surface, you might look at it and say, these are two very similar sounding pilot projects. When you start to really dig in, you can see there were pieces of that that helped make one be successful and one not as much for that period of time. Also, I'll just note, what works in Anaheim might not work in Eugene. We need to discover that for ourselves. Pilot projects are a way for us to try new technologies. There's new futures out there for us. We know that the future will include the bus in some form, but it probably won't only be the bus. So we need to try some different things out. We noticed that there's things like TNCs, bike share, scooter shares out there now. People are going to find ways to help get where they need to go, and we've always been a part of that and look to continue to be. I can make quick mention of a couple other pilot programs that we've been a part of that just illustrate ways that we try and be of service to our community. One of those is Florence Yachats Connector, and then later Florence Eugene Connector. Florence Yachats Connector was the very last stretch of coastal highway that was unserved by public transportation. We partnered with ODOT to initiate a pilot program to check the viability. One of the challenges for us is when we ask the public, would you like more public transit in an area? Typically, invariably, we hear, yeah, we'd love to ride more transit, more buses is a good thing, more service is a good thing. But that doesn't necessarily always translate into actual ridership. Sometimes we need to see for ourselves what that's like. We were able to demonstrate the viability of that type of service, but it also was a stretch for us. It started to go not just outside of our general service area, but outside of the county. Doesn't mean that it shouldn't be done, but we needed to work with partners and collaborate on that. So ODOT was a really great partner for us throughout that pilot program, and we wound up turning over both the vehicle we used and the service itself over to LCOG to assist us with. That also served as a pathway for us to try other pilot programs. So the Florence Eugene Connector was the next step of that. We heard overwhelmingly that members of the public and the community wanted a public transit path to be able to get them to the coast. And Florence Eugene was the step needed to make that happen. So we served as a technical advisor with LCOG to be able to set up a pilot program to check the viability of that. I'll give one other example. Lane Douglas Connector served as a path for folks to go south from City of Cottage Grove, originally intended as a means to be able to get to the VA clinic. We wound up evaluating that service, looking at how much it costs per trip, and we started to look at what's the problem we're solving, that we have veterans who need transportation. And we found that the Lane Douglas Connector wasn't the right tool for the job. We still wanted to make sure that people had access to that transportation, but we thought we could more efficiently do that in another way. So that's where we were able to shift and broadcast to the public in advance. We're going to stop the pilot for the Lane Douglas Connector, and we're going to find another way to provide that same kind of service so that people can still have their need met, and we can do more of it than we otherwise could. In our case, instead of making sure that there's a bus that can go on a loop between two communities, make sure that we have an on-demand service so that as people need it, we can both do that service and do it more often at the times that are most useful for people. So those are just some examples. And as I mentioned, we don't have much time to talk today, but I just wanted to give you some of the different types of pilots. We've had many more, and we're planning many more in the future to be able to offer to the community to find new and innovative ways to both leverage technology, new modes of transportation, and ultimately try and solve transportation problems in our community. So that's what we've always done, and we're continuing to do as part of how we're innovating for transportation in the future.
Thanks, John. Any questions from the committee? Thoughts, ideas?
When I was looking at this afternoon, Tom, thanks. When I was looking at this afternoon, I saw that there was a reference to referring back to goals, but I didn't see a step, and maybe I just missed it, but I didn't see a step that spoke specifically to identifying criteria for success as part of the development of the program. And that I don't know if I just missed it or if it's buried in there somewhere, or
So you're talking about this document, or
yeah, the one that was part of our board packet. I think this was it.
right? We had a pilot program implementation guide and the mobility management strategy itself.
This is the one I was looking at.
Okay.
So where I went through the different stages, the planning, and
Right.
I do see, well, it does say goals and an evaluation framework. So I just didn't see specifically identification of the criteria for how will you know if it was successful or not.
Jeff.
I'm happy to speak to that. So I think it's an important question and something that we want to make sure that groups like this can help guide us in that decision making. So we want to make sure that we're providing good value for the community. So part of what we're accomplishing with the pilot project is we're trying something new, checking the viability of that. We may succeed or fail on that, but how are we measuring success? Part of that is, are we able to adapt and make something, be flexible in creating something that adds value to the community? But the other part is really we need to evaluate and say, if you give me $100, what are we getting back for that money? Can we do more? Can we do different? And are we meeting a need that we couldn't otherwise meet? So there may be some folks that are otherwise slipping through the cracks in our community. In particular, I'm thinking about areas that we might not already go or people that we might not already serve. Older adults, people with disabilities, folks in rural areas that may not have access to transportation, gap services that we may need to find creative solutions for. So in those cases, it may wind up being a more expensive per trip cost, but at a great value to connect folks who have really exigent needs in our community. So when we're looking at getting people to critical medical appointments, or making sure that veterans are receiving care, or making sure that folks who might not ordinarily have access to employment or education can make that connection. So that's where first mile, last mile can be a really important tool. Tom, do you want to speak a little bit to that?
Yeah, I was just gonna, so I'm sorry, I want to make sure, this should have been in your packet.
Yeah, I was. And I actually see something that I missed when I read it over this afternoon.
Okay, there is a figure 2 that has the goals spelled out.
Right.
I think too, what would be, you know, if you're interested in digging more deeply, we do have a mobility management decision-making process that goes through a very detailed set of criteria that we'd be using in an actual assessment, and that might help you in terms of getting more.
Oh, I found the one sentence that I was looking for that I didn't see earlier.
Okay.
Performance measures should be selected to help measure the hypothesis or question the pilot or questions the pilot is intended to answer. So that's I just didn't see that one sentence. When
Okay.
I looked at it earlier today.
Good.
Thank you.
Yeah. Other questions or comments at this point? Yeah.
Do you have a set time period for your pilot programs, like a minimum or a maximum time period that you allow it to go before making a decision, or?
I would say there's a number of considerations there, but John.
Yeah, these are all really great questions. So no, in the respect that part of the strength of a pilot project is its ability to adapt and change. So we may begin with an idea in mind, but I'll give an example going back to the Connector and MGO pilots that I mentioned earlier. We initiated those pilots and then the pandemic hit, and we realized having consistent data through that time period was not possible. We needed to extend those out so that we had more time to refine what we were doing, as well as to collect some consistent information about how these programs were doing, and then just check in with our ridership if these are still the right modes, or if we needed to make further changes. So we wound up extending those out further so that we could better understand under the circumstances, which again would be something very challenging for us to do quickly on a route like our fixed route system, but pilot programs can quickly adapt and change to emerging needs. So as we discover that something's working or not, we might decide, for example, something we learned on the Cottage Grove Connector, there were peak service hours when we got lots of requests for service. So we doubled up the number of vehicles during that period of time to better meet that need. And we could do that very quickly. In addition, we rolled out a community survey where we got on buses, handed people surveys. We also, for folks that were using the app, we could push surveys out to their phones so that they could tell us how we're doing, what's working, what's not, and make changes accordingly. So based on that, we could make incremental refinements and change. And then we reevaluate and then repeat that process until we feel comfortable with it, that we either know that it's working or know that it wasn't.
So a question I have relates to like immediate like impact events that affect the ridership, like let's say the world games, duck games. You know, how do you just throw that data out, or do you just immediately throw that into another bowl of, okay, let's look at how that's going to affect?
Well, my take at that, and John might have have more to add, let's put it that way, is that, we're interested. That's like, I don't know if you ever met a wastewater engineer. They love these storm events because they know that the water's going to test their system. And so they're out there, they're watching how the water's flowing. Yeah. And in the same way, we'd be really intrigued with how, because we know that our system wasn't meant to handle that, but how's it doing? What would we do differently to handle that better? I don't know, John, if you...
Yeah, some of these are predictable lessons. So we know if there's a football game happening, things are going to be pretty different in our community. Some things we learn along the way or might be surprising. And that's actually one of the great advantages of a pilot program is we get to learn both from our successes and our opportunities. So, an example might be, did you know that at our customer service centers, busiest day of the month is typically around the 20th of the month? It seems random, but everybody's coming in and getting their month pass for the following month. It's when we open that up for folks to be able to transact their business. And we have a flood of people that come in and do that. So we're able to prepare and account for that. We may not always have all those lessons ready in advance, but we certainly are prepared to learn them along the way. And that's where I truly feel like our strength is in our flexibility and ability to adapt to changing situations through a pilot program. So it gives us the tools we need to be able to do that, and also to account for things that we couldn't account for. So some of that we just have to learn by doing. Again, what works in other communities may just not work here, or we may need to find our own path. Or I think that's where we've certainly seen the importance of making sure that we're working collaboratively, including wide stakeholders throughout our community to help us with informed guidance along the way. So we're able to provide some technical expertise on how and where vehicles can best perform. And then we really need to hear from the public, does this work for you? Do we need to do something different? So that's where I'll use Cottage Grove as another example. When we heard from folks, there are folks who weren't using smartphones. We said, all right, let's get a dispatcher, somebody that you can call and they'll be able to help along the way. Or let's implement a travel training program. If what you need is to learn how to use the app, we can help with that. So if there's unmet needs, that's an area that we can be there for. It's different than what we would normally provide on our fixed route service, but it helps the system as a whole be stronger and more efficient.
Yeah, I would add to that just the example of the Cottage Grove connector, and there were a number of people that preferred to schedule ahead and were uncomfortable using the app. So how do we adapt to that? So John described that. In the same way, the lessons that we might learn from the Cottage Grove connector, we might use that to then do another pilot, say in Springfield someplace. We might find that the population that's using that system there is different from and so we might have to adapt to that. And I think what I'm trying to get at here is, as we want to use pilots to learn ultimately how the particular option we're testing fits with the community we're serving. And for a lot of, in a lot of ways, how we operate a system in Cottage Grove might be different in other parts of our district. So just thinking about how it's constantly adapting. And again, it's not just taking stuff off the shelf. It's how do you fit it to the community that we're trying to serve? And what do we learn from that? What are the costs? What are the benefits?
Any other questions?
I do have a thought or two, and thank you for both the good work that you both do trying to get folks to be able to commute from one place to the other. And I do recognize that it's very hard, to be honest with you, it's very hard to actually start up a service somewhere when you know that it's going to basically start off minimal, and then from that point on kind of grow as the word gets out. A question I wanted to ask, or thought, just if you have any comment around it. When we do our surveys and we talk to our folks, is there any aspect of that in relationship to our pilot programs, any aspect of that where we try to gauge those recipients if they actually reach out to others to encourage or tell them, hey, look, there is a service here. Can you join on? In other words, I mean, that's how service kind of expands from word to word, phone to phone, and folks telling each other that the experience is not only good, but also the opportunity to be able to ride from one place to the other. Any thought around how that has happened with these pilots, if you will?
You want to go?
Yeah, sure. That's a great question. So I would say the success of any of our pilot programs is dependent on our collaboration with the community. That includes getting the word out. It also makes sure that the service we're providing is something that's valuable to the public. If the service isn't providing something to the community, then no amount of talking about it is going to get people to ride it. So we need to make sure that that's working together. Typically, if we're working with a contractor, they're highly motivated in that we share in success on that. They want to make sure that it's viable and that people are riding it. Communication is key, letting people know. I would say, I'll draw back upon the Cottage Grove connector. I would say at best we had a mixed reaction when we first unveiled that to the community, I think is fair to say. Now, I think the data shows that it's very warmly embraced, that people see that as an important tool that serves the community within the Cottage Grove city limits. And so somewhere within the pilot program, there was a change in hearts and minds about what it was accomplishing. And that took communication and energy and effort along the way. You're absolutely right. Building ridership takes time. On fixed route, we see that more than anywhere, that people need time to grow, to learn, to rely on it, that the bus is going to be there every day and that I can catch it and get to work or get to school or get my groceries and it'll get me home when I need to get home. These new modes add an even larger area of variability in that maybe somebody's never used an app on their phone to call a vehicle to come pick them up before. And how do you make sure that you're going to get to work on time? And there's this learning experience that as a community we need to grow upon. There's other lessons that we'll probably be learning along the way and new technologies that are out there. So self-driving cars is an example of something that's kind of emergent. There's certainly new technologies, new innovations that we're looking at and exploring. We've got program funding flagged in our STIF plan for the upcoming biennium for us to try some new things. It's flexible enough that we can adapt as technologies change, as the needs of our community change, while at the same time, putting something in a pilot status lets us be able to pivot if we need to, or if we need to adapt to changing conditions. So I would say it's absolutely right. If we wind up needing more time to build up support, if we feel that a pilot program's truly serving a need and it's the education piece that's missing or the communication piece, we can take more time for that. But we also need to make sure that we're closely monitoring and evaluating and surveying so that if it's not meeting that need, we can go in a different direction and we can move those resources into another area that it is helpful.
Yeah, if I could add to that too, one of the things that we're becoming more and more aware of, we're not the only ones doing this. We're not the only transit district looking at how can we extend our role as mobility providers. And so there's a growing amount of literature, research, experience from other districts that we can draw on. And what Dallas Area Rapid Transit's doing may not fit exactly to what we're trying to do, but some of the like John was saying, there's a lot of things that go into making the technologies, not just of the vehicles, but how passengers are interacting with the service. There's a lot of different things that and I'm using Dallas as just an example, but they've got a platform, they've got a service, they've got some experience. We can learn from that. With the understanding that that's Dallas, Texas, and this is Eugene, Oregon. But some of the technologies are the technologies working the way they should. That should, regardless of where you're at, that should tell us something and whether that's good. So I think that's the other kind of level that we're plugging into, is there's just a lot of growing experience around this.
One last thought, and I know this is a long shot, I would love to see some self-driving LTD cars or buses out there. I'm not saying we're going to do that, no, but thinking that we're thinking about the future and so forth, wow, that would be first in the world. Just a thought out there. Thank you.
I'll say, Vidal, we've been first in some things. I'm not sure that's the thing that we would want to be first, just saying right now.
I thought I remember that we actually experimented with that with MX for a while.
We had what was called magnetic guidance.
Yeah, that's what.
Was a research project out of Berkeley that Caltrans had actually started. AC Transit in Oakland was actually doing it first. They came up here. We did a segment between Walnut and Dad's Gate, I believe. The way that worked, the magnetic guidance, the driver was still there, and it was for certain segments. It wouldn't be for the whole line. The technology worked for the most part. I think what happened, so it was just a pilot. And it wasn't in general production, so it wasn't something you go out and buy off the shelf. And since then, I've kept in touch with the main researcher there. They're trying it in other areas, but they still haven't got, I would say, the core business thing together where we could do it. But the idea there was that it just was really assisting more than anything else. That can help in some situations and not in others. But
there are communities that are experimenting with that technology. So I think Phoenix, San Francisco, I think LA is about to begin a pilot with that. And that's just one of many different types of services and technologies that's out there and on the horizon. So I think we just want to find what's going to best serve our community, what complements the bus. Earlier, we made mention of first mile, last mile. Sometimes it's not that we need to perform the whole trip on a different mode. We just need to connect somebody to our fixed route bus system. If we can get someone on MX, we can get someone to the bus stop, that's all they need. So otherwise, they're winding up unserved or they're having a more expensive trip. So if we can find a way to make that easier or cheaper for members of the public, that's what we're here to do.
So this is a rich topic of discussion. I'm sure we'll be back with more as we move forward. Thank you.
Okay, so do you want to go ahead and move on to the community outreach and assessment?
Yes, I would like to do that.
Okay. This is going to be an hour.
That's what?
It's supposed to be an hour worth.
We'll see. There is a lot to talk about. That hour rests on how many questions you have.
Okay.
I hope you have a lot. But I'd like to bring up Joshua Shank. He is with InfraStrategies, and he is the principal participating in this project for us. And I'm going to read his description. So he brings 26 years of experience in transportation, and in particular, he served as LA Metro's Chief Innovation Officer, responsible for bringing new ideas to LA Metro, and led the development of LA Metro's 10-year strategic plan. We'll be drawing on his deep understanding of the issues involved in really bringing change and innovation both within the organization and outside of it. And so I'm excited to have him on the team. And tonight, what we wanted to try and do is really step through where we're at with the COCA process. And again, COCA is the acronym for Community Outreach Communications Assessment. And just to start with, we've talked about this a little bit, but this actually came out of, as we started talking, Jameson came on, started asking the question, what does our community need us to be? One of the things was, we realized that we wanted to really develop a consistent framework across all of our communication that was actually effective in engaging a broad range of the community in the things that we're trying to do. And in that context, we went out and sought a firm, and InfraStrategies got the work. And I know, Joshua, you've learned a lot in talking to community members just in setting this up, but then we've got this process going forward. Maybe you can kind of pick it up.
Yeah, thanks, Tom, and it's great to meet all of you and be here today to talk to you a little bit about what we're doing. We got involved in this work because I think LTD recognized that there was a need for a kind of reset with the community and thinking about how they were approaching the community in a new way, because this is a pretty strong rule of running anything, right? If you keep doing the same thing and not achieving better results, then you probably should change what you're doing. And I think there was a recognition that what had been done to this point was not necessarily achieving the goals that the organization might have. So we were very interested in doing this work because we do a lot of strategic planning work with public transit agencies and thinking about what are you trying to achieve, and then therefore, if you're trying to achieve those things, what are the steps that you take in order to get there? And in many ways, this is about that, but with respect to the relationship with the community. One of the things that I found both working at LA Metro and earlier in my career is that there is a tendency on the part of many transit agencies to come up with an idea for solving some problem and then presenting it to the community and saying, hey, look, here's the problem that we've solved with this idea. And the community might say things like, well, we didn't ask you to solve that problem, first of all, so we don't necessarily have agreement on which problem we're solving. But also they might say, well, maybe we agree that that's the problem we're solving, but we don't necessarily agree that this is the way to solve it. So part of effective engagement with the community is getting on the same page about what it is you're trying to do, and then discussing in collaboration with the community what the answers might be to solving that problem. And it's very tempting as a public agency to think we're the experts. We know how to solve this problem, and that's true. We do have expertise, but that doesn't mean that the solution that you come up with is going to be the one that actually the community wants, or that's going to be successful in moving forward. So what we decided to do in working with Tom and the team here at LTD was to start with gathering information so we could understand what had happened in the past. Not that we wanted to dwell on the past or try to right past wrongs or anything like that. It's just really important. It was important for us to understand the context. And we reviewed all the documents we could to really understand what had happened and had led up to this point. But we found that the documents only told a certain part of the story, right? They told what was written down, and that's, sometimes fact, sometimes someone's perspective. We really needed, in order to better understand what had happened, to talk to people in the community about what had happened previously. So we spent a substantial amount of time interviewing key stakeholders, people in the region, to understand, all right, what is your perspective on what's happened here? It's kind of like the witnesses to a car crash, right? Like you got to get everyone's perspective on it. Probably no one is perfectly accurate, but at least you start to get some common themes when you talk to people about, well, what was the problem? And certainly one of the problems we heard consistently was there wasn't necessarily agreement on what problem everyone was trying to solve. And I think the previous discussion was kind of getting at that too, right? Like a pilot program is only useful if you know that you have some issue that this pilot is intending to address. You wouldn't just bring in a new technology because it's a new technology. You bring it in because it does something that furthers a specific objective that you have. And the same thing was emerging from this conversation with the community and with stakeholders, that the clarity was needed about what it was that people wanted to accomplish. A second thing was that it had become clear that whatever methods of community engagement had gone on, they were not effective in achieving the goal of bringing enough of the community along to move forward with specific projects. And that information was really important because what that tells us is not only do we have to think about what problem we're trying to solve, we have to think about what are the methods of interaction with the community that are going to be effective. And I think that's really where this community steering council comes in, because what we've done here is we've tried to create a council that we can rely on to help us set up a framework for interacting with the community going forward. So the idea is not to, go into a room and say, oh, look, we've studied best practices for community engagement and here they are, and so do this. It's instead to develop what this community needs as far as engagement with the community itself. So it's a really interesting and unique process. I don't think that I've seen it anywhere else, where we're working with the community to determine how we want to work with the community, right? And it is a really important and I think useful process that, if it is successful in resetting that relationship and developing it into something very powerful, could be a model for other agencies to follow. I heard some discussion about that in the previous conversation as well. And I'm not aware of anyone else that is going about it quite this way. And I think it does present that kind of opportunity. So we spent a substantial amount of time putting together the application process and the criteria for determining the members of this community. And I think that you've seen some of that in your packets. And we wound up with a group that I think is a fair balance of the appropriate types of people that need to be on this committee. For example, making sure that there are riders, but also non-riders, making sure that there are students, making sure that it's a diverse demographic makeup, making sure that it's a diverse makeup in terms of age, in terms of perspective, in terms of geography, lots of different categories that we wanted to fill. And then setting them up for success by trying to empower them from the beginning to lead their own way and get where they want to go. So the first thing that we did, we set up the agenda for the first meeting, and we set a projected agenda for what would be accomplished at the 6 meetings in total. But we also said, okay, we're going to have you guys elect a chair and a vice chair, and they are going to be the ones leading this committee going forward. So it's not LTD and it's not InfraStrategies, it's not us. We'll be there to help. We'll do all the work behind the scenes because these folks have jobs, right? So they need to do that. But we want you to set the direction for how things are going to go. And that's exactly what's happened so far. They've elected a chair and a vice chair at the first meeting. We've now consulted with those folks about the agenda for the next meeting. We've developed a set of bylaws that the committee is going to run by. And we are slowly going to be turning over the full control of the meeting to the folks and the committee, to the folks on the committee. And our hope is that by the end of this process, it's an ad hoc committee that is intended to have 6 meetings. If they need more, they can potentially have more, but we're hoping that within 6 meetings, they can come up with a framework, which of course, again, we'll be the ones doing the work of writing the framework, but based on their ideas, based on their thoughts, a framework for how community engagement should proceed going forward. And with that, it will provide a blueprint for LTD and hopefully not just a reset in terms of the relationship because of this engagement, because of the committee itself, but our hope is that these folks will go back to the people in their areas, in their neighborhoods, to their constituencies and say, we've talked about it, we've worked it out, and here's how we're going to be engaging going forward. And this is going to be much more productive and hopefully lead to some more positive outcomes.
Thanks, Joshua. Questions, comments?
My first one is follow-up. So you've got the 6 meetings, right? And then they come together with criteria, they do the initial eval. And so what happens after that? Do you bring them back after everything's done to say, okay, this is what we did? Do the time, however amount of time the community's looked at these things, or do you find a whole new committee to evaluate?
I certainly hope not. I mean, I think that the evaluation process will have to be conducted by LTD staff and the board itself, right? And looking at, okay, now that we've had this reset, how are things different? Are we seeing that kind of change? Are we seeing that kind of improvement towards the goals that we care about that we weren't seeing previously? And if we're not, why is that? What did we do that's not in the framework? What should be in the framework that isn't? There's nothing that says we can't call the committee back if we say, like, hey, we tried this process, we tried this framework, and here are some flaws. What ideas do you have for fixing that? But I think ultimately it's going to be up to LTD and the board to see if it's working.
That's why I asked the question, because I'm coming from Denver with light rail. They had a bunch of community outreach initially, bunch of meetings, especially going through 5 points and all the businesses that were going to be affected going through. And they did all these studies. They said, okay, well, we'll make sure we take a look at that. And nobody ever came back. And a lot of things failed. So that's always a question for me when we do things like this is, how do we check back in?
Well, yeah. If I could just add some context too, as we see it behind or underneath or after this framework is developed, it's really important for us, I believe, to continue to engage with the community. And I'm not going to say kind of we weren't doing this, but I think what this is really bringing into focus is that we need to continue to evolve our communications, our outreach process. Number one, with the goal of really trying to connect that community of communities that we live in a process with LTD to, and you've heard me use this term before, co-create as we move forward. And I think that's, in addition to this framework, then this framework is going to evolve. Yeah. If we're doing it right, we're going to learn and continue to evolve how we communicate and connect with our community.
Great.
That's right.
Great. Thank you. Thank you.
You mentioned 6 meetings, or 6 meet times. What's the duration from the first meeting to the last meeting? Is this just one time in the space of 3 months, or?
Yes, the committee's meeting every 2 weeks. There is a slight break in the middle, so it'll last until December. That's the intention.
I actually like the idea, but I do recognize, with everything, there's always challenges one way or the other. Once these meetings are done, you come up with everyone's, got this idea, this frame that we're going to work with. How would you account for, and correct me if I'm not thinking about this correctly, I'm just trying to look at this from a long range perspective. How would you account for changes within the community itself over time? In other words, yes, we got a problem. We need to figure out a way to address that. And we probably figured it out today, which is great. But 2 years down the road, 3 years down the road, demographics are changing, like you mentioned. Other folks are coming into the neighborhood. Other folks are leaving the community. Forgive me for saying it this way, even the political mindset of the community, if you will, is constantly having some influences on it that's changing it over time. How do you account for, I'm going to say it this way, that delta or change in things over time, if that makes sense to you?
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And I don't think, it's not like this framework is going to be completed and then it'll be the framework for community engagement for all time. As Tom said, it does have to evolve. I do think there are certain tenets of community engagement that are really critical for success that do go across even changing neighborhoods. There are some that don't. There are some things that have to evolve and change as the communities change. But there's some basic tenets, like, for example, trying to avoid what we call the DAD approach, the decide, announce, defend approach of community engagement, right? Like, here's the answer, here it is, now tell us what you think. That's not really very useful and often results in conflict. And we just recommend against that. Similarly, I don't know, have you ever been to those public meetings where the staff of the government gets on stage and talking, and then the audience yells at them? Like, that's not a productive method of engagement. We've found that workshops where you have stations where people can come and talk to you about things personally and not in a big group, those types of things are universal benefits, right? So hopefully some stuff in the framework will be universal and will outlast any neighborhood changes. But you're absolutely right, there will be changes, and LTD has to be flexible to adjust those changes. And if that means going back and saying, okay, we're going to reconvene this group, or we're going to reconvene a new version of this group, or we're going to bring the community, the framework for review every year and see what's changed. Those are all reasonable things that could be done.
And let me add, that's a great question, but I'd share some history. And so you can go back into the 60s when this region was The interstate highway system had been planned and that was starting to roll out. I-5 was being considered, and the federal funding was available to think about how our region was going to connect into this interstate system. And I've spent a lot of time reading through the discussions that were going on at that time. And it was a lot about kind of, we'd have to go through this neighborhood, we'd have to do this, we'd have to do that. There was a solution, a freeway solution to just about everything you can imagine. The Amazon, if you're familiar with the Amazon Parkway, that was intended to be a 4-lane freeway coming from the south into downtown. It would have separated the U of O and downtown. Interestingly, as is this community's want, there was a minority report submitted to this highway plan that suggested maybe we should look at bicycles and pedestrians in this plan. And so that's back then. I think a key kind of hallmark legislation was Goal 1 of the state that requires, focuses on continuous comprehensive engagement with the communities that you're planning for as part of the planning goals, Goal 1. And that was 1970, I believe. So for 50 some years, we've been doing that. And I'll tell you, the way we were communicating in 1970, we've evolved. The community's evolved. So I think, I'm not saying that it's just going to happen naturally. We have to be intentional about it, but that is the intent. We recognize that things change over time and how we communicate. And I would say we're here maybe because we haven't, and maybe not just LTD, but we haven't paid attention to how the changes in community. We're not as effective as I think we were 10 years ago, for example. But that's what we're trying to get at. How do we continue to improve? And again, that's what that co-creating model is. If you're co-creating, then you're adapting as you go. You're learning. You're focused on making sure we're always connected and understanding what's going on. I don't know if that helps, but.
Who's the chair and vice chair?
I think it's in your packet, but we have a woman,
Amber.
Amber Kalel. She is the partner in Systems West Engineering.
Yep.
Is the chair, and then Daniel Padilla is the vice chair. And that should have been that was a handout, I think, attachment. We had the members attached, but they again, as Joshua said, they held an election and those two volunteered. And in fact, our intent, we don't know if they're available yet, our intent is to have them come to the board work session in October. We'll be talking more about this project, and you'll have a chance to, again, haven't asked if they're available yet, but that's our intent, would be to bring them.
Okay, any other questions or comments? Yeah.
I just have a comment. These two guys asked all the questions I had, but
Sorry, Gate.
no, that's great. I'd rather you guys actually ask them. But I'm so pleased that we're even doing this, and I am cautiously optimistic that this is going to bring some real results for LTD, and I think we have a heck of a slate of people that you guys got to do this. So I am very, very excited to see what comes out of this.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, I think from what I see on the agenda, that is the last official thing on the agenda for the day. We do have to talk about October, I believe, additions. Let me go back to this. Thank you, Todd.
Yes.
on the back. That's why I couldn't find it.
Mhm.
Items for action or information for future meeting. I have to go to page 27. I think it says, right? So what I see here is just ride source operations analysis and reimagine the ride part 2. I'm not really sure.
I can speak to that. So, and we've discussed Reimagine the Ride process as being kind of the umbrella framing for all the planning that we're doing. So the ride source operations analysis is one. The COCA project is part of that. The comprehensive operations analysis that we're doing is part of that. We're going to be updating our long-range transit plan after all these years. But I would say the thing that connects everything is actually the mobility management framework project. That is, we've gone over this in a high sense. We've procured the committee. We're actually having our first kickoff on Thursday.
Okay.
I should not say committee, the consultants that we're using. In fact, we've asked Joshua to help us out on that as well. The intent of that framework is actually got 2 main foci. One is that external, both our partners and our community of communities, looking at, starting to understand when we say mobility management, what does that mean? What are we talking about? How do you feel? What do you what are your ideas? And again, internally, helping with the transition around moving to this new framework of being mobility managers. We have a lot going for us, and I know I'll talk more about this later, but we have a lot going for us to the extent that we're already doing a lot of mobility management. When you think about the work that John's doing with RideSource and the pilots that we're doing, and we're starting to, there's a number of things that we're doing that I think fit with that, and that framework is going to help kind of bring that all together.
Okay, great. Well, that sounds fantastic. Anybody have any comments to that? Anything to add? Okay. Well, thank you, Elma, for giving me the shortest meeting that I've attended. I'm going to call this strategic planning meeting, committee meeting to close at 6:30. Thank you. I got the gavel.